The webinar is titled Negotiating Empowerment, Women's Everyday Experiences in Malawi Agriculture, Livelihoods and Social Relations. I'm Stephen Whitfield. I'm the director of the Global Food and Environment Institute, and I'm going to be the chair for today's session. The Global Food and Environment Institute is an interdisciplinary research community. We bring together members from across academia, industry, and public policy to work on interdisciplinary, integrated challenges of food security and climate change. And if you want to find out more about the Institute, then do visit our website. We run a webinar series of which this is part, and if you check the chat, you'll find a link to details of other webinars in the series. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mapenzie. She's a good friend and colleague of mine. She is a research fellow in climate change and food systems here at the university, and she works as part of the FoSTA-Health research project. Her research sits at the intersection of agrarian livelihoods, food systems transformation, climate change and social justice in sub-Saharan Africa. And her work is really grounded in sort of critical development theory with a particular focus on inclusive agricultural innovation in Malawi. And she's going to be sharing insights from that research today. Just before I hand over to Mapenzie, a reminder of the webinar etiquette. So please do ensure that your cameras and microphones are switched off for the duration of the webinar. The presentation itself should take about 20 minutes. Throughout the presentation, please do use the chat function to make comments or ask questions. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A, and I'll collate questions from the chat for that. So also just to let you know, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and all of the other webinars in the series can also be found there on YouTube. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mapenzie. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Stephen. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
All right. Now let's see if technology is not going to fail us. Okay. We are good. Okay, so as I've been introduced, my name is Dr. Mapenzie Tauzie, and I work with University of Leeds. And today I'm going to take you through part of my work on women empowerment in Malawi. As Stephen has already said, this is part of a much bigger project, FoSTA-Health. And today, in 20 minutes, there is just so much that I'm going to share. I'm going to try my best to take you through our key findings. So just to set the scene, in Malawi, I think in sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, women face inequitable and unfair terms of access to and control over production resources. However, when you look at the policies and the developmental discussions taking place, they do acknowledge the role that women have in development and transformative food systems. But the reality on the ground is that the systemic challenges that women face are deeply embedded within the socio-economic context that they operate in as they pursue their livelihoods. So my research was conducted in Malawi, rural Malawi, and we, as part of our participants, we engaged those that were receiving, that were part of Titukulane. Titukulane is a care project that just ended, I think, early this year, or if not last year. And it was basically focused on achieving sustainable and equitable, resilient food and nutrition security for the ultra poor and chronically vulnerable households. So we involved those that were part of that project and those that were not part of that project. And some of the interventions that they were receiving within this activity included trainings, entrepreneurship trainings, and training of female smallholder farmers. They were also putting them into village savings and loan groups. They called them village banks, if you have heard of them. So our focus when we went on to understand women empowerment, we were coming from various literature that we have done, and we tried to go in the field almost with a blank slate to sort of move away from the preconceived ideas of what women empowerment is, especially when you're looking at the project interventions or development interventions. We are more interested in understanding how women perceive women empowerment to be within their lived experiences. So we tried to take we tried to have a conversation with our participants without sort of like preempting what women empowerment is. So we would expect to hear that from them in our conversations. So we used different tools to get to our goal of understanding what women empowerment was within the lived experiences of women. We used oral life histories because we were interested in seeing the different positions that women take or negotiate from childhood to adulthood or even old age, if there was like a change in what they understood women empowerment to be within the aspirations that they held. So we also had semi-structured interviews, we had focus group discussions, and we also had photo voice. Just to say that all these data collection methods we're using for both men and women. So the conversations took place between not just men, not just women. So just a bit on the theoretical framing around that, looking at the oral life histories, and like I have said, that we were trying to trace women's changing roles and aspirations in their life stages, but also our understanding that women empowerment is relational, is dynamic, and also contextual as well. But also we acknowledge that women take on different positions. So we had an intersectionality approach in also trying to understand the different positions that they had and the financial or within the social context that they were living in, how that was shaping the agency and freedoms that they had. And also trying to understand how they were navigating or negotiating their pathways within their everyday livelihoods. And we drew on structuration theory and the patriarchal bargaining. I'm not going to go into details and dive into the key findings. So one of the things that we found was that women empowerment for the women that we were having a conversation with was they redefined it through knowledge and collective adaptation. So for instance, here is a short story about Rosina, who is a 30-year married woman. She had a small piece of land, and she shared with us that her husband, as the head of the household, and this is usually the social, the cultural setting in Malawi, especially in Zomba where we were, the man is the head of the house. So the husband, as the head of the house, was responsible for making all the key decisions, even what to grow, and mainly they were growing maize. Malawi's staple food being maize, mainly we eat in Sima. I'm a Malawian myself. So she had less say about what was to be grown because that was understood to be the responsibility of the husband. But as a woman who was going through, who was part of other groups, but also going through childbearing, we found that as part of their maternity, they were taught about nutrition. So she was more knowledgeable about that, which put her in a position where she was questioning, okay, how am I going to get a balanced diet for my household when we are only growing maize? They produce what they eat what they produce. But through that training, she shared that she learned how to diversify crops on the half acre that they had. And she went on to convince her husband that, okay, you don't have to grow any less maize, because with what I have learned, we should be able to harvest as much as we have harvested before, but let me add on other crops to that as well, which was a good deal for her husband. And she let her go ahead and do that. And they ended up harvesting more and had options, vegetables as part of their household food. And in the end, I've shared there, she says, my wife, what should we grow next time? Now she became part of the decision-making process and seeing the output that they were getting. So men were still dominating the market, but now we found that Rosina was part of the decision-making process at household. Then we also have Taonga Mbewe, who is divorced and only had a small piece of land. But her deepest desire was to educate her daughter, because she didn't want her daughter to end up in the same situation that she was, with less to survive on. And she shared that she had a conversation. She asked some other men that were doing mobile money transfers, but she needed a piece of land. And these men had the liberty to be at the market, at the trading center where business was good. But in the village, she didn't have land. But she knew to reach out to the chief to ask for a small spot, not even a piece of, just a small spot where she could put her mobile booth. And she started with 100,000, but the time we were doing the interview with her, she had grown that to over 1 million kwacha. And her daughter as well is educated. For her, her greatest achievement was educating her daughter. I think the growing of her business was a plus. And the respect that she's now getting, not just from the ladies, but also from the men who would come to transfer money and seeing that she's there the next day and the next day and the next day, the business is thriving. So we found that for these women, empowerment was not just being linked to like a financial opportunity, but being able to pursue their aspirations, for example, intergenerational empowerment. And also there is Fatima Rogers as well, a 32-year-old woman who is married and has a child and another one on the way. Mainly for her, she was involved in taking care of the home. As expected by her community, a married woman has to take care of her home. However, she wanted to be more productive than that. So she ended up growing some vegetables, which she thought she was just going to do that for household consumption. But as it was more, she thought, well, I can go to the market. At that time, she was expecting, I can go to the market in my condition. A pregnant woman in my community is not expected to be at the market. But instead, what I would do is I'll just sell my vegetables on the veranda. So she did that, and for some reason, business picked up. It was a convenient spot for other households to buy the vegetables from her. And before you know it, she's contributing to the household operations expenses, which also somehow gave her an opportunity to have her husband more at home as well, to help with the childcare, to help also with her business, or sometimes just to let her attend to that while she attends, while the husband takes care of the child. And for her, that was a sense of empowerment that she felt at that moment, because now, apart from, even though she was not able to engage in the market at the trading center, but she managed to bring the market at her home and remain productive, but also engage more with her husband and participate in the operations of the home. So in terms of the looking at the different lived experiences that these women shared and others, our findings brought up this summary typology where we have transformative women empowerment, which reflects deep shifts in power relations, identity, and social norms. And it signals women's growing ability to redefine roles, influence systems, and transfer empowerment. For example, independence, when they get their independence and they are able to be self-sufficient, meet their needs without relying on a husband or a man within their households. And also the overall recognition of, oh, you have a thriving business, you've been here for months on end, and you are still holding like your own. So we also had a categorization of transactional empowerment, which can be defined as being pragmatic and functional or externally incentivized, often focused on accessing on managing resources without necessarily shifting the deeper power hierarchies. So here you see, for example, in one of the cases, it was a small piece of land. She didn't have access to it. She couldn't afford to buy more land to own, means of production. But using the same small piece of land, she was able to utilize her knowledge as a capability on how to go about growing different crops that would give her that ability to achieve a balanced diet or nutrition for her household and any extra income that her home might need. So not necessarily changing the existing structures on the ground that favors men having land or productive resources, but learning to negotiate within that to make sure that something works out, some form of empowerment comes to her, even within those challenges. And lastly, we have constrained women empowerment, which highlight the partial or ambivalent forms of empowerment, where gains are negotiated within persistent patriarchal and structural inequalities or cultural expectations. For example, negotiating the gender and household roles as a woman, as a woman who is expecting, even though she has the desire to be productive, to engage with the market, which normally would be marked as, okay, we have linked women to the market, but we are finding that these women are living within communities that is not really that straightforward, but somehow they are finding a way to navigate that, for example, bringing the market to the home, so that they are fitting in within the constrained environment or the structural constraints that they exist in, while still achieving some sense of empowerment or some sense of fulfillment. So what are the main takeaways? So the main takeaways would be empowerment in agriculture is learning, it's being resilient and pragmatic. So while maybe big project interventions would look at, okay, we want to empower women, empowerment for women means they have access to land, for instance. For these women, empowerment was being able to use the knowledge that they have and act on that, given the existing constraints that they are living in. And also, when you understand that, it counters the narrow economic definitions by showing the self-sufficiency as felt experience rooted in daily life. It's not a big event that's going to happen 6 months or 2 years from now, but they found empowerment within the everyday, mundane operations that happens. Okay, now we have for example, nzima with vegetables, but we can contribute to that because from my business on the veranda, I've managed to afford, for example, dry fish to add to that. And for that, for the women that we interviewed, for that, they understood that as being having a sense of being empowered. And when we look into nutrition and care, empowerment is relational and affective. It's rooted in dignity, recognition, and hope for continuity and legacy. So it kind of extends the time horizon, not just for now you're not just thinking about, okay, what are we going to eat? We're eating maize, that's sufficient. But we had these women also thinking about, okay, I want a good upbringing for my child. I want a balanced diet for my household, and how do I achieve that? So it's not just about the women themselves, but also their households as a whole. And one of the interesting things that we also find out was when we asked, okay, if your husbands are not leaving anything for your home, are you just okay? Won't you just prepare something for you and your children and eat and you're fine? They say, no, but I am married. It's important that my husband eats as well. So when he comes from wherever he has gone to, even though he didn't leave anything, for me, the ability to provide for my husband as well, so that he gets to eat and sleep on a full stomach, that is empowering for me as a woman, which was very interesting as well to see how the social aspect, the relational aspect was very much valued by these women. And also empowerment through social relations is co-produced and collective, emerging from shared belonging, reciprocity, and negotiation of gendered expectations. It's sort of like when you look at these stories, when you look at their own conceptualization of what women empowerment is, you get to see how it undermines the binary thinking of empowered versus oppressed. It's sort of like they value the relationship. The chief is the one who has the piece of land, who has the ability to give me that. So what do? I go through the system that exists. He owns, he's the custodian of the land. I can go to him and ask for the piece of land and run my business there. I do not have to sort of like wait until I have accumulated so much money to buy a piece of land, but I can work within the systems. And also it demonstrates the importance of social infrastructure and empowerment. We found that some of the women were sharing how by being part of a group, by being part of a collaborative, they were able to grow some crops, for example, vegetables, where men within their households would take control of that when it comes to the marketing time. These groups of women would produce, harvest, and as a group market that as well. While if it's a woman doing this individual at household level, when it comes to harvesting, with the communities within which they are living in, it's the husband who has to handle that. So their power feels limited, but within these groups they are able to do what they could not. So the social infrastructure that they belong to also formed like a stronger part of what women empowerment is, or it meant for them. So without taking much of your time, that ends my presentation today. And yeah, I'll take any questions that are there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mapenzie. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do get your questions in the chat.
So
and I'll do my best to field those.
I'm gonna have to stop sharing to see. Should I stop sharing?
No, don't you worry about seeing the chat, because I'll
Okay.
keep an eye on that and I'll relay the questions.
Okay.
Whilst those come in, I'll take the chair's prerogative and ask a couple of questions of my own, if that's okay. Yeah, so I think the work's really interesting that you presented in terms of kind of unpacking what women's empowerment can mean and look like, and showing that it can be very multifaceted, often quite subtle, can look quite different in different settings. I'm interested in any reflections you have on what you see as sort of enabling conditions for women's empowerment, or the sort of catalysts of women's empowerment. Now, in some of the stories, you mentioned that there was an aspect of training involved that was maybe the catalyst, but in other cases it seems like it comes about more sort of coincidentally or unintentionally. So if you could say something a bit more on sort of what perhaps creates the shifts that result in women becoming empowered.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. Yes, so when you hear the stories that that the women share, knowledge. Let me say knowledge. Knowledge was one of the I think key catalysts that came through. But this knowledge came through different sources. It came through, for example, project interventions like Titulani Care, the training, the farmer field business schools that they were part of. Sometimes it came through the social groups that they were part of, or it came through the everyday interactions from other women. It wouldn't be that they are the direct, for example, beneficiary or recipient for that training, but hearing from peers as well, getting more knowledge about that. And sometimes it was could be mere curiosity that, okay, I've planted maize, but I'm gonna need vegetables to go with that. I might as well just throw in the seeds as well. So knowledge was a key catalyst, but also when we were doing the focus groups, it was interesting as well when we were doing, for example, budget negotiations. Men were more willing to accept women's position on a certain type of food. And the reasons they would give is, oh, they know better about that, or women are more knowledgeable about that. So we found that men were more open, were more willing to, extend that platform where women could exercise agency if they felt that the women were more knowledgeable. So knowledge was a key avenue, but also the collective, the communities within which the women were operating, the more open-minded they were, the more they were interacting with other communities that were more open and moving away from these cultural, social restrictions, the better opportunities it created for the women. And also another avenue would be aspirations. Their own childhood aspirations, for example, some of them aspired to be teachers, some of them aspired to be nurses, and we still found that those aspirations that they had, especially from the direct interactions from their parents or teachers in primary school, also continued to influence some of the things that they would take a chance in, for example, agency or defy market in the trading center to market at home. So I would say that these were the enabling conditions. Their past experiences had an influence. The communities they were living in had an influence, and the interactions, the spaces that gave them the extra knowledge they needed had an influence as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Petros is asking, what I think is a related question about the role for policy in women's empowerment. So if you could share any reflections on what role for policy in this context.
Okay. I think in short, I would say that there are policies, there are key documents, development documents, agendas that recognize women as key actors in development. But one of the things that I think they tend to be weak on are implementation, one, and also the position within which women are positioned. Most of the times, women are positioned as recipients of that training, recipients of that intervention, or linking them to one place or the other. But women creators, they are actors of their own destinies, if I can say that. So having them part of the discussion when it comes to what is it that they want. So for instance, when you look at project interventions or policies, they'll be talking of, we want to link women to markets. But some of the women, for them, it's not really being at the market. For example, when they harvest their produce and taking it to the market, some of them, they don't really want that. But what they want is to be engaged in the decision process, engaged in the, okay, how do we go about marketing this? And I can do my own part. I can take care of my kids at home and also do some form of production or marketing at my home. So trying to understand the contextual conditions and then being adaptable. Policies should be adaptable in a way that looks into what is it that the women want and how they can help achieve that. But definitely policy has got a key part to play, especially because their interventions can come on at a larger scale. And also, I think providing in terms of support around some of the cultural or social structures that put women in worse positions than they started with. So I think that can also be a key area that policies can address in this case. Yeah.
Yeah. Petrus has actually asked a follow-on question which links to the very last point that you just made about cultural and social structures, and the importance of sort of broader cultural shifts and social mindset shifts. Could you maybe just say something about what you mean by those cultural and social structures?
Okay, so for culture and social structures, I think one thing that we must all understand is they are deeply embedded in the everyday lives of, for example, for these women. Some of the norms that some of the social norms that they operate within, for example, well, women are not expected to be in the market. If you trace it all back, you find that it's because the expectation is that they should take care of the children at home. But then with the changing of things with childcare, those things can change. You can sort of like break down those key norms. But also apart from those social structures that they operate in, these women as well, they are living within communities where social relationships matter to them as well. Their position within the communities that they are living in. So while the straightforward or the modern way would be well, let's encourage women to be at the market. They would be there, but when they come back within those communities, it would be, well, it's that woman who is spending all the time at the market and not at home. And women do not want to exist within these compromised social relationships, because for them, women empowerment has to do with should I say the peace, the constant, the good relationships that they have within their with their neighbors and all that. So looking at these social structures, I think women should be allowed to negotiate. They should be allowed to negotiate, and policies or interventions should be allowed to support within their negotiation processes without determining for them that, okay, this is not a social structure that we want you to exist in. This is not a cultural structure within which we want you to exist in. Because like I have said, women themselves are actors, can make decisions on what it is that they want, what it is they want to be part of. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'll ask another question if I may. So as researchers or maybe as development practitioners, perhaps for better or worse, we often have this need to somehow measure women's empowerment and sort of be able to kind of evaluate, maybe even quantify it. What are the implications of your research, do you think, for people in those types of roles, and the sort of methods and approaches that we might adopt in order to sort of identify, measure women's empowerment?
Okay, thank you so much for that good question. So, we've just been to a CGIAR conference in Cape Town, and I was there with my colleague, Dr. Ruth Smith, and one of the things that we talked about more was on how the majority of the presentations that were shared there were focused on the quantitative aspects of measuring women empowerment. But it's interesting in a way to see how from the first two slides, we can all agree that women empowerment is contextual, but by the time you get to the last slide on impacts and outputs, there's this tendency to want to generalize and then measure everything. So from our own research, from my research, I think one thing that I can say is quantitative means of measuring empowerment is not enough, because it leaves out some nuances that are important, that makes the difference to the women, that almost determines, how she would exercise her agency or not. And it is very easy for researchers or interventions to miss out on that if you're just, for example, focusing on the numbers. For instance, if we've talked about training be a key area. For quantitative methods, it would be as much as, okay, we have trained 20,000 women, but it doesn't really go further to find out, okay, what has that training translated into, for example, or what has that led to the changes in the household dynamics. The same way when you're looking at the village and savings loans, money saved and all that, for quantitative, it's easy to just say, oh, our women have managed to save this much, but you do not really have the contextual aspect which you get, for example, from qualitative methods, non-quantifiable methods, where women share with you how saving for that much money has meant extra pressure on them, has meant them taking some money that was meant for household consumption to meet that dietary goal into putting it into saving and just reducing that diet to just vegetables. You miss out on those nuances that are very important. And also, questions like markets, for example, the women that we interviewed, not only in Malawi, but also from the FoSTA research that Ruth is reading in Tanzania, we found that women didn't want to grow pigeon peas because it meant for them that the women, when the husbands harvest that, they take that to the market and they enjoy the money with another woman. So they were like, no, I'm not going to grow pigeon peas, even though I know that it is fetching a higher market value than maize. So no, I'm not going to grow that because I don't want to compromise the social relationships. So when you focus on the quantifiable aspects of women empowerment, there's so much that is left out. There's so much that you lose out, and it's hard to understand why is it that they are not engaging in pigeon peas. It's good for women. It's a crop for women. It's good, but they're not growing it. You never have to have the response to that if the focus is just on the quantifiable. But I think I would say mixing the two. That's not to say quantifiable methods are not doing the job. They do, but I think it's important to also look at the qualitative aspect of women empowerment, and most of the times that that qualitative aspect is not measurable. And it was also interesting during the conference, one of the representatives from Melinda Gates Foundation shared that they are more open to learning about the qualitative methods that could be used together in understanding women empowerment, and put a call out to say that, well, as donors, they need to also change their focus on the quantifiable indicators that they focus on to also include the qualitative, the non-quantifiable aspects, because that's what women empowerment is. It's relational, it's contextual, and that's not always going to be possible for one to put a number to it. Sorry, I went on for a quite there. I'm very passionate about that subject.
No, that's great. Thanks so much, Mapenzie. So that's brought us to the end of our time. So it's just left to me to say thank you once again to Mapenzie for that really insightful presentation. If you do have questions or want to hear more about Mapenzie's work, then do get in touch with her, and also check out the FoSTA-Health website and the GFEI channels as well. And also check the GFEI channels for upcoming webinars in the series. All right, with that, I'll say thank you very much to everyone for your participation, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Bye.